Hi guys, and welcome to another 7-minute lecture. We will be looking at nuclear proliferation today. So what is a nuclear weapon? Let's look at that first. Do not assume that a nuclear weapon is simply a weapon of mass destruction, that it's simply a weapon that is capable of large-scale destruction, because it's not. A nuclear weapon is simply a weapon that uses nuclear energy for its destructive power, that uses nuclear reactions for its destructive nature. That's all it is. While it's true that the two nuclear weapons that we've seen used so far in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were big ones capable of large-scale destruction, that simply does not make something a nuclear weapon. You could even create one that has a much smaller destructive radius than the ones we saw in the Second World War. So the important factor there is that it uses nuclear energy to be destructive. Proliferation means sharing, spreading, right? So nuclear proliferation, therefore, is the idea that nuclear weapons can be spread or shared across state borders. That's what nuclear proliferation is. The international community and the powers that be are clearly against this idea. The international community, the United Nations, has a very strict, what is called a non-proliferation regime. They consider nuclear proliferation to be one of the biggest crimes that a country can commit as far as global security goes, and the actions and sanctions usually tend to be pretty hard and swift against countries that are suspected of trying to build nuclear weapons, even when you compare it to countries that are suspected of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity and all that. Nuclear non-proliferation will get you in trouble a lot faster than most of those other things. So the countries in favor of non-proliferation, the countries in favor of saying, look, you cannot have nuclear weapons. Countries cannot be allowed to build nuclear weapons. Their argument is typically that nuclear weapons are so destructive and so powerful that most countries in the world cannot be handed the responsibility, cannot be trusted with the responsibility of owning nuclear weapons, because they might do something dumb. They might do something that triggers a third world war, which would trigger a nuclear Armageddon or whatever it is. Because it's the type of technology, the type of weapon that can level an entire area and make that area uninhabitable for a long period of time, it's captured the public imagination to the point where you possessing nuclear power really changes your standing in the world, and it changes your position in the global hierarchy, which is the point being made by those who say that non-proliferation is simply a tool that larger countries, that the superpowers use to make sure that they remain the strongest in the world, while the rest of us have to be below them. So people who are against non-proliferation will say, why is it that the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, who happen to be the rulers of the world, are all nuclear powers, but they tell the rest of us that we cannot become nuclear powers? Well, to them, the answer is simple. To the people who say that, the answer is simply that all of these nuclear powers know that they will no longer remain the most powerful actors in world politics. They will no longer be the rulers of the world if multiple countries, if everybody starts getting access to nuclear weapons. Because once you have a nuclear weapon, they need to deal with you in a completely different fashion. They can't just take you for granted, and this major military advantage that they spend billions of dollars trying to achieve over you will no longer be as effective if you become a nuclear power. To be fair, there is justification to both arguments. While it is pretty fair to say that all the superpowers possess nuclear weapons, and it's thus unfair for them to say that the rest of us cannot, while that is certainly a fair point, and it's understandable why a lot of people feel that way, at the same time, it's also undeniable that we do see many irresponsible military leaders all over the world. Typically tend to be military leaders. They might be authoritarian, politically elected leaders as well, but almost always it happens to be a military leader in some country with weak governance, where you really get a sense that, looking at some of their rhetoric and the way that they conduct their policies, the aggressive stance that they take in politics and such, it really is worrying when you think about the possibility of some of them someday gaining nuclear weapons. If we look at an example like North Korea, that would be one of the sort of clearest examples of a country where the international community in general, across political lines, are worried about whether North Korea will be able to use nuclear weapons responsibly if North Korea gets access to it. But at the same time, you could argue that there are a number of countries all over the world who do have the right to own nuclear weapons and who can be entrusted with using nuclear weapons responsibly. An immediate example that might come to mind would be India, where when India first got nuclear weapons, many Western scholars and analysts reacted very negatively and suggested that this would bring about some kind of nuclear war, that it was very irresponsible of India to do this, that India could not be trusted with nuclear weapons. And in the decades since then, there's still been no nuclear war between India and Pakistan. The two countries have things have escalated into an armed conflict between the two countries even since India became a nuclear power and subsequently Pakistan became a nuclear power as well. However, it has never come to a point where where we seem to be on the brink of nuclear Armageddon. That is not to say that it will not happen in the future. That's not to say that one of the other superpowers will not use nuclear weapons first either. But it is interesting to note that countries which many of these superpowers dismiss as being too irresponsible and incapable of handling nuclear weapons have turned out to be able to handle nuclear weapons just fine. So tell me what you guys think in the comments. Do you think countries should have the right to pursue nuclear weapons and to build nuclear weapons? Or do you agree with the powers that be in the international community that global security has to take precedence over all else, and that it is better for us to contain the number of countries owning nuclear weapons, even if that means perpetuating the present power structure in geopolitics today? If you like this content, please subscribe and like. Thank you. I'll see you guys next time.